And welcome to whatever episode number it is of Two Wizards and a Mic, where Andrew and I get together and we talk about stuff. This is Andrew over here. He is the sponsor of the episode, Cawood Publishing. Get your books there today, and basically a really damn awesome DM. And I'm Shane. I play and goof off, so that's my role. Um, and today we're talking about what?
We are talking about how to plan a D&D session. So we talked a little bit about a broad idea of a whole campaign, which would be a series of these adventures. So today we're going to talk about planning one session, which interestingly has changed over time. I would say back in the 70s and 80s, there were more games played by kids and younger people because it was so new, and the games
Yeah.
were longer for sure. Now I would say most of the games are 2 to 4 hours from what I've seen and heard and the polls I've looked at. There are people who still play long games, and those are usually, again, younger people. Um,
Yeah.
I couldn't. Yeah, I think it would be a challenge for me personally to play all day like I did, I did in 1979.
Oh, oh yeah. I remember playing. You'd start at 6 in the afternoon or in the evening, and you'd go until like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I mean, to be honest, every time that we've played, I last like 4 hours, and I'm glad that we have like a chunk and then a break and then a chunk, because I think by like the last 10 minutes, I might be doing this like, oh, are
Yeah.
we playing? Yeah, I'm old. I need rest.
Well, the other thing about it too is that, obviously there's really a minimum. I think if you don't go for a couple hours, I think 2 hours really is the minimum. Otherwise, there's not really that much can happen. Again, this just,
Yeah.
this depends how big your group is. So we're
True.
talking about an
True.
average size group of, I'd say 3 to 6 people. Um, so yeah, I think most games are 2, 3, 4 hours. Our West of the Wood group plays for about 4 hours, including our break. And the other group I have plays for 3 hours with a very short break.
Right. Yeah, I mean the break it can help if you're playing for longer sessions, especially when if you'd want to try, like if it's a special event and you actually really want to get some stuff of the story done that's sort of been, these are the key things we want to hit today. Um, but yeah, for like if you really want to like be efficient, 15 minutes tops for a break, and they just keep going.
Yeah, I think if you have a shorter game, 2, 3 hours, yeah, the short break works pretty well. Um, yeah, so games are shorter. I think still, in terms of organizing the one session, you want to make sure you have notes on the important things, your overall story. You want to note the level of the party. I always note the passive perceptions of the characters because you use that quite a bit, and the location of the story. So we talked in our last video when you're planning the whole campaign about the settings of Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, the world of Kryn. Shane mentions for Dragonlance, and then our world of Mir, or of course Homebrew. You can create your own world. So once you have those, if it's a published adventure, that gives you a lot of lore and a lot of content for your session. You want to make sure who's your big bad evil guy, and probably in the first session of a campaign, they're not going to play a huge role. You might introduce them.
Yeah.
Um, it might be a dragon or a wizard, beholder, devil, um, vampire. There's lots of classic villains. You don't want to wait too long to introduce them, and you also don't want to take too long to get your main plot rolling. I know that
Yeah.
one campaign I did, I just waited a bit too long and it didn't really get going. And it was one of the times we had breaks. And later I just wrote as an adventure and published it. So yeah, if you look on the DM's Guild, there's an adventure called The Wizard Higgs, which was the campaign I planned for you guys in the West of the Wood group, but I just started it. I didn't get the main plot going fast enough.
Right.
I don't think you want to give out too much information at the beginning, but you want to give enough to keep things moving in the right direction. So those are the kind of things at the beginning, what are some of your classic villains in terms of like at the heart of the
Oh,
story?
wow. One of my favorite villains in a game that I ran um, was a character named Wicklow.
Mm,
And I had created this entire sort of long history of this character because he wasn't undead, but he was immortal.
mm-hmm,
And he had been living for a long time. And essentially, when the party had encountered what he was doing, and this was in sort of a desert world kind of idea, and they were trying to figure out what kind of stuff he was up to. They'd only heard about him in whispers, kind of thing, and eventually, uh, because he had all these magical abilities, he would torture the party by suddenly they would be attacked by some sort of weird creature that I'd never seen before. And I think I threw in like gigantic spiders and things like that, stuff that didn't exist in the world, because
mm-hmm.
I sort of made that. I wanted it to be more sort of spiders were not huge; they were pretty small. That kind of realistic kind of idea, and and then I think I had a party of werewolves show up at one point, and usually when they were sleeping, when they went for their rests, that's when these things would attack, and it was fascinating because it was a neat way to kind of get me as the guy running the game to kind of what would somebody who's been living a very long time who's kind of bored,
Mm-hmm.
he's got stuff, his life is, he's got nothing but pleasure and money and everything else, and this party comes in to try and mess up with some of his business operations. What would he actually do? And I thought, well, he would probably stalk them for some time, and the party would not know he was around, and like, oh, they're going to sleep now. Okay, oh, great. All right, I'll give them an hour, and then
Yeah, yeah.
and do these. And it was kind of fun to get into that headspace of that kind of thing. But for classic sort of villains, I would think from established modules from years past, I would say Strahd is probably the most interesting out of the bunch, and
Mm-hmm.
then probably after that would be probably some of the I'm trying to remember their names, but it's been a while. But the giants in the original sort of against the giant stuff, like a lot of those were quite memorable, and I liked playing those sorts of characters too. But yeah,
Yeah, those are some good examples. And you bring up a really good point about you want to make sure that you know the motivations of your villain and your monsters. Because if you know that,
yeah,
you can really ad lib a lot of what happens after that. And that's the kind of thing you
yeah,
can put in your notes is what, like you say, what are they thinking about? What do they want? Um, and you can have these things happen in the story and the campaign even when the players aren't there. So, say they arrive at a village early on in this first session, they can find out about things that are happening even when they're not there, and you can make the world really come to life. And
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
and a
Because
lot of
that I mean
times,
that's oh,
sorry, a
go ahead.
lot of times, not only about motivations, but you want to understand how intelligent your villain is and your monsters, especially at the beginning. A lot of your monsters and your kind of henchman level, your beginner level villains, they're not actually going to be that smart, and that's good because the party isn't that strong yet. And only much later on, I think, in the campaign are they going to really deal with very intelligent creatures like, vampires, for instance,
Yeah,
who will become, they're not going to be satisfied if somebody just goes down and they're unconscious. They're going to go make sure they finish this person off.
yeah,
Whereas when you're fighting a goblin and maybe they've knocked somebody out and they're still stabilized, goblins are probably not going to notice or check, you know.
yeah. They're not going to poke you with a stick to be like, "Are you dead now?" Yeah,
Probably no, not it. I'd say at least the first 5 levels for the first 5 levels of the party, they're not probably going to run into too many really bright monsters and villains. maybe in the background there might be, um, like I had the vampires were at the center of our first campaign, but you didn't actually come face to face and have to deal with them until you were at least probably 7th or 8th level, maybe a bit higher.
Right.
For low level characters, it would be over quick.
Well, especially when you have characters that, say, if you run across a minor villain, say a sub boss, as it were,
Hmm.
um, and a lot of those types of characters, I mean, in my experience, they generally don't like to come after you directly. It's like, they notice you in town. They're like, okay, well, I better hire 20 guys to go get them,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that also brings kind of life to those kinds of characters because you don't have, uh, they're not like I'm trying to think of a creature that just comes at you and doesn't give up until you're dead or it's dead. But basically, there's like a fiend or some sort of devil where
Hmm.
they're just evil. So I'm
Hmm.
gonna chop you in pieces. Well, I'm gonna fight you. Well, you can do that, sure, but I'm gonna keep coming at you until one of us is toast.
Hmm.
And but yeah, you want to have a little more, as you put it, like you want a little more life in these characters, and you want to give them some sort of fleshed out roundness to them, so that they are not necessarily, going to be just an evil creature in the middle of the night. You want them to be a little more interesting, but you still have to play kind of within their sort of rules of what kind of creature they are, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely, yeah, and I think again, you're not going to have a lot of super intelligent, challenging creatures for at the very beginning in terms of that sort of aspect. There might be a lot of brute force involved. Um, you also want to make sure, as you said, you know about the other henchmen, the other sort of evil NPCs, and also the good NPCs who maybe are going to help the party in some way or end up being
Right.
hired by the party or are just important in that part of the world. Who runs the village, who runs the inn, that kind of thing. And it's a good thing to have just a collection of NPCs too at hand that you could use on the fly. So we've made a lot of those kind of books. Our main series are called Friends and Foes. We have 3 books on the DM's Guild, and then there's also Hirelings and Henchmen on Drive Through. And those books are just filled with characters that you could add to different areas. So the heart really of your planning a session are the encounters, and you want to make sure these are balanced, and you want to. It helps if they can be moved around. For example, say the party take a road that you weren't expecting them to take. You could move if there's an ambush going to happen. You could move that ambush to a different location, for example.
Right.
Or if there's a very interesting NPC or several NPCs that the party you want them to meet, maybe that meeting can occur in a number of different places. It could occur on the road, back in the village, maybe outside a temple or outside a dungeon. So I think it's really important to be able to have those encounters that you can move around. Um, Sometimes they can't be. Sometimes the encounter has to take place at this spot. But I think many encounters, you can move around and use them depending on what the party does.
Yeah, I'm just looking up the this particular book, which of course everyone out there needs to go and pick up, which is the Between Adventures one,
Mm.
which is a book that I have bought, I don't know, ages ago. Um, but it has a lot, yeah, just like you're saying, it has a lot of those sorts of little sprinkles of things where you have the different characters, the different uh, one thing I like about the books that you've written, by the way, is you deal a lot with stuff that I don't think people actually think about when they're not playing or planning an adventure.
Mhm.
That there's all of these ideas that you could have for locations, these ideas for um, the different characters you're going to encounter, and having resources like those books, or even just bringing them up on your own.
Hmm.
But having a resource like that book gives, I think, a lot of DMs when they're prepping for a game and planning out the adventure is that they could just go, I'm going to grab that, flip it open, look for, okay, I need a character that's a shopkeeper. I need a
Hmm.
character who's a rogue. There's already that kind of stuff planned out that even gets them, to really flesh out a character that's going to really add to their game. And yeah, so while you were talking there, I was like, I've got to find the link for it. So if you saw the link on the screen, don't forget to pause the video and go there because it's really cool. And but yeah,
Yeah, no, those are, and yeah, those kind of handbooks, the Between Adventures Handbook and Between Dungeons Handbook. So those have all the things, like you said, you can use in planning to fill out your settlement, to fill out road encounters, for example, because at the beginning, the party's not going to be able to travel very far. So
yeah.
you kind of want to do a big circle around the area where they could end up, and then make sure you have things prepared for that territory. So, inns and taverns and stables, stores, and then road encounters. What happens if they travel from here to here? Um, you also want to include things with the terrain. How is that going to affect things? Is it going to slow the travel down? Maybe the weather gets involved as well. And all that kind of description makes the world really come to life and be more immersive. And again, have things happen that are going to happen whether or not the party go there or not, so that they've
Well,
realized that the
exactly.
world is alive.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you have like when you talk about the terrain, like the weather effects and what kind of things those and how those can actually play together, because
Mhm.
you could have, if you don't want your characters to go somewhere where they're off the beaten path, you just want them to kind of, just direct them in the way that you want the story to go. Um, it could be something like, oh well, you do try to go that way, but remember the rain. It looks like this entire
Mhm.
area has been washed out, or
Mhm.
flooded, or look, it flooded out, and something really deep within the earth has suddenly come out and doesn't want you to go that way, and it'll eat you if you
Right.
try to go. But yeah, because you got the that, and then you can basically build the encounters off of that sort of effect, which I think is something that a lot of people don't do. They don't use the environment in a way that gives them some organic stuff, because that's the one thing I like about the creatures. I like them to be
Mhm.
that they have a reason to be there. Like if
Yeah,
you go into a dungeon and suddenly there are stone golems, it's like, well, they would be there because they're protecting something.
exactly.
And but if you found a stone golem wandering around on the road out in the daylight, it's like, should we kill him or is he lost? Hello, sir, do you need help? There's just kind of things you kind of have to really think about when you're planning these out. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the first things I'll do as far as looking at the monsters for each session is I'll just look at the party's challenge rating level. Basically, what creatures are they going to be able to deal with? And then look at what creatures that level and lower could be found in this setting where they are, and this environment, this terrain. And then sometimes you even want to have some of the more powerful creatures that maybe they just fly by, or you find out they did something, even though the party is not going to actually come head to head with them. They're not actually going to have to deal with them. But they,
right.
again, the world seems alive because that's what kind of creatures live there. Um, I also make treasure when I plan quite open ended. So I have a list of treasure basically. Again, if you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or in our Treasured Finds book, the treasure is organized. So characters of a certain level, this is the kind of treasure they can get. So what I do is I just make a list of treasure, including coins, including gemstones, including artifacts or art items, and certain NPCs might have certain treasure, but the rest of it I actually dole out as I go along and connect it to the encounter, so that if a fight is if there's a really big fight, I can make that treasure chest or that hoard that they find it's going to be a bit more than maybe another encounter. So maybe if an encounter goes really quickly and it doesn't look like the enemy was that difficult, the treasure hoard is not going to be as great.
And the thing that I like about um, the when you're finding treasure, you're not necessarily Like, well, I love the moments where it's like you open the chest and inside are 70,000 platinum pieces, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, and it's like I can carry 20 of those. And there's going to be the rest. And then you have to,
Mhm.
like, we've spent so many times, some of our adventures, of actually people going, okay, so we've got to keep that, because you could ignore copper pieces, or you could
Mhm.
ignore something that's not very valuable. But if you run across those kinds of things, it's like we really want to keep them, so you just try to stash them, or you try to come up with these elaborate schemes about how you're gonna like let's get a cart and like throw it onto a cart and we'll wheel it out of the dungeon right now and we'll take it down the street. And it's like
Right, right.
I love that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Especially back in original Dungeons and Dragons, the hordes were ridiculous. Like you said, you open the treasure chest, there's 20,000 gold pieces, a +5 great sword, a +3 shield, 14 healing potions. Like it was just crazy. It was not realistic. So, and we've had with our West of the Wood group again, where there's a recent adventure you guys were in a session where they found all this treasure in this old castle and they were about to enter a portal to travel somewhere else. They didn't know where they were going. They were pursuing somebody, but they knew they couldn't carry all the treasure, so they buried it in the castle and they hoped to go back and get it one day. It's sort of like in Skyrim when you've totally overloaded yourself, you find some cool treasure and you're like, I'll put it in this barrel and I'll come back later if I remember and if it's still going to be there.
Oh, I do that a lot, especially when you start having when you have a home base of some sort in Skyrim and
Mhm.
you dump things into stuff and then you run out of
Yeah.
space and it's like to start throwing it on the floor. And that becomes a whole adventure in itself because you've got all like just all this stuff and you're like,
Yeah.
I didn't plan this very well and now I have to find that sword that had the whatever thing attached to it. And I'm glad they don't let you drop quest items because that's something that I've done
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh,
in
my God.
games
For
before,
sure.
and
For
it's
sure.
like, oh crap, where did I put the which was it? And I need to, oh man, you have to backtrack for 40 hours.
For sure. Another thing you want to look at in terms of planning too is maps. You probably you want to map out this little area that you're starting with, and for whatever session you're doing. Or if you have a published adventure or a published setting, again, that helps you because you sometimes have those maps.
Yeah.
One example I'll give quickly is the classic U1 Sinister Secret of Salt Marsh. Say that
Oh,
quickly
nice.
10
Yeah,
times.
exactly.
So this is a very classic adventure from AD&D in the 80s. So in that adventure, the players are arriving in a seaside port. The council of this town is asking for help because they're worried about a house nearby on the coast that appears to be haunted. So that's your basic starting point. So as a dungeon master, what I would do would be fill out that town a bit, get at least one inn, maybe and one tavern with some characters in them. Find out what they're like, put a little description. Think about the economy of the area and the fishermen. Think about what boats could be at the docks. What people are being worshipped at the temple probably has to do with the ocean. Then make sure you have some encounters on the road, and they don't have to be, again, at first level, they don't have to be that involved and that dangerous, but have some encounters from the road to the haunted house and maybe back to the haunted house if they survive. And
Yeah.
then get to know, because it's a published adventure, get to know everything you can, again, that's in there. Get to know the haunted house. Read up on all the creatures that are in there. Read up on the treasure and the magic items. Read up on what spells can be cast. So that would be, for me, that would be kind of the basics, and know the motivations of the people who run the town and whoever or whatever is at this house. If it's haunted, maybe it's not. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of thing I would do. And again, it's much easier with a published adventure, but we've given you kind of an outline for a homebrew possibility as well. The other thing, which we've talked about a little bit before, which we could maybe end up today with, is possible starts. So Shane gave a
Yeah.
great start last time about being in a jail and there's a jailbreak and the walls explosion. There's an explosion there. So the classic start is everyone meets in a tavern. Another great start is that you've been hired. Like, for example, in the Saltmarsh adventure, not the new one, the original one,
Right.
that you've been hired by the town. So you could be hired by someone to help them out. And often there's treasure or some reward. Another one is that you're a member of a faction already, and there's something that that faction needs to do, and you're part of it. One that you mentioned last week, Shane, was a natural disaster of some kind.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, I think. Which actually I've noticed in a lot of homebrew stuff I've seen online that there are a few more of those kinds of events where
Mhm.
earthquakes can happen, either through because of what's going on when in the adventure, like if you have somebody doing something that's disturbing the earth or whatever.
Right.
But then there's other things like floods, like are very simple. It's like suddenly
Mhm.
everybody roll a deck save because otherwise you're all going into the creek,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So it's really can throw uh, players off because one thing that I always try to avoid is when they get into that mindset of here's the adventure, we are the heroes, and we have to get to
Mhm.
point
Mhm.
B,
Mhm.
and that's where we'll settle the adventure and get the reward. But it's like, well, like you're the being swept away by beer in your adventure, completely a thing that you came up with to solve a problem of a character not being or a player not being there, and
Mhm.
then being tossed into like an underground tunnel somewhere. I forgot exactly where we went, um, but that it definitely gives you that ability that you've planned everything out. You got thrown a curveball. You looked at your plan. You're like, you know what? There's suddenly going to be another tunnel underneath where they are. That
Mhm.
they don't see right now, and then suddenly this beer tsunami is going to come through,
Mhm.
and boom, hey, there it is. The wall gives way, and suddenly you're somewhere else. So yeah, a lot of all of that planning, and being able to come up with ideas on the fly, it really helps. So you've got that base, and you can just play with it afterwards.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Great point. And that, your all your, I'm sure you're speaking with all your improv experience. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
once you
definitely
have that.
helps.
Yeah. Well, I think you can learn that, and once you have that structure, you can do lots of things. And many times for me, a lot of those improv experiences and things that happen are the best parts of the game. But it helps
Yeah,
to have that structure there that you can rely on. Um, Another
exactly.
start is if you're lost, like you could just be lost. I should also point out about the natural disaster that I think you mentioned this last time, that a great point about it is that it really brings the party together immediately. They have to work together. Same in the circumstance and the situation that if they're lost, um, they could be spies, they could be exiles. That's a good one. I haven't used that one yet. Um, a smuggler. We had that before where the whole party were smugglers. So they're
Right.
not evil. We don't have evil PCs in our story, but they're not good
They're
either.
just working people,
That's
they're
right.
doing their work.
Exactly. Exactly.
They're trying to survive.
Yeah. And then I mentioned in Skyrim about how a popular mod has many of these kind of different starts to the game. So ones that they have include you're just out camping. Um, you're a property owner already, so that's another possibility. Maybe you own an inn or a tavern or a store. You're a soldier in a war, or a soldier at the end of a war. You arrive by ship somewhere or arrive in some kind of new land, and there's many other ideas, but and then each session, of course, you're going to have a new start. um, but there's a lot of original ways of starting off the whole campaign as well.
Yeah, my favorite from that particular mod in Skyrim was I chose to be a vampire for some reason, and then I was a store owner in some town, and you start out in the middle of the day standing out in a square, and I'm like, why am I out here? But
I did one recently where it's you start in a jail and you have one lockpick and rags. You're wearing rags, and that is it. You don't have any money. You don't have any weapons. And you start out in one of the Thalmor. castles. So these are some of the
Great.
nastiest, toughest evil elves. And basically, your plan, I think the only way you can survive, personally, is if the lockpick works, then you just run. And so that's what I did. And I got to every door just as they were about to like just cut me down. Um, yeah, there's another great
That would be a
start.
great campaign for a game. Just like,
It would
okay,
be. It would be.
run. What do you
Yeah,
mean?
it
Shouldn't
would
we
be for
fight
sure.
the blah, blah? No, you shouldn't. Why? You don't have anything. What do you
For
mean?
sure.
I have a character that's supposed to have all these skills. Nope, you don't. Not right now.
Yeah. Another good one was that this person, you start out as a bandit. So they put you in a cave with a whole bunch of bandits. But I don't play evil characters in Skyrim either. So I just killed all the bandits, took all their stuff, and then left. Of course, because that's a good character, a hero.
Hello, Larry. I'm so glad you joined our. Why are you stabbing me?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens. Yeah, they don't even go on. By the time they're on alert, it's over, and you're walking out with their treasure, and they're all just lying there.
I gotta say, that's a really solid way to start in that particular game. Because then you
Yeah,
suddenly have all this stuff you would not normally have access to, because
yeah,
the normal start is sort of, here's a bow and arrow and a sword. Good luck to you. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but on that note, I mean, that's a lot of really good information about starting and being able to plan out how to actually have a successful D&D session where you're going to be able to make most people happy, including the DM, which is probably the most important, would you say?
Well, for me, I'm just setting the scene for the characters, and I hope and the players. I hope they enjoy it.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, like you and I are always saying, at the end of
It's
it,
a
just a what? Sorry.
game. It's a
Oh,
game.
see? And thank you all for watching, and thank you all. And don't forget to leave comments and all that kind of fun stuff, because we're doing this for the fun of it, and we want you to have fun too. So we'll see you next week with more pearls of wisdom falling from our minds.
Later.